The first thing my ex-wife saw that evening was a black Ford Expedition rolling slowly into her driveway with no headlights on. The second thing she saw was me stepping out of it. Not the version of me she thought she knew for 28 years. Not the retired postal worker she used to roll her eyes at. Not the quiet grandfather who got lost trying to find the right aisle at Home Depot. That night, Margaret saw 4 men climb out behind me and stand at attention without a word. And when the youngest one turned to me and said, "Colonel Hayes, we're set," my ex-wife's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the porch steps. I still remember the way her voice came out. Small. Almost a whisper. "Walter," she said. "What is this?" 14 minutes earlier, I had been sitting alone in my truck outside a gas station off Route 29 inches, Charlottesville, trying to decide whether to drive home or stop for a cup of bad coffee. The night was warm for October. Crickets going full volume in the fields on both sides of the road. I had just left Margaret's house after the worst birthday dinner our son had ever tried to organize, which was saying something because the man had organized a lot of failed family gatherings over the years. God love him, he kept trying. My son's name is Derek. He turned 32 that fall. His girlfriend, a woman named Cassie, who had moved in with him 6 months earlier, had pushed him to invite both his parents because she believed in family unity, the way some people believe in weather forecasts, with total conviction and almost no supporting evidence. Derek had warned me ahead of time. He'd said, "Dad, just don't engage." I told him I wouldn't. I meant it when I said it. Margaret started in around the soup course. She had a gift for that, timing her commentary to land right when you had a spoon in your hand and no clean escape. She looked across the table at Cassie and said, with that particular brand of warmth that isn't actually warm at all, Walter was always more comfortable with his hobbies than with actual responsibility. 20 years of playing soldier, and the man still can't hang a ceiling fan without calling someone. Cassie gave a polite smile. Derek looked at his bread roll. I set down my spoon and said, quietly, 23 years, Margaret. She waved her hand like she was shooing a fly. Whatever. The point stands. The point didn't stand, but after enough years of marriage, and then enough years of divorce, I had learned that correcting Margaret's point wasn't the same as winning an argument. It was more like touching an electric fence to prove to yourself it still worked. Pointless and painful in equal measure. I got through the rest of dinner the way I got through most things after retirement, by staying calm, keeping my breathing steady, and reminding myself that nothing happening at a dinner table in Virginia was actually a threat to anyone's physical safety. Old habits from old work. Derek hugged me tightly near the door on my way out. Longer than usual. He had his mother's dark eyes, but thankfully not her delivery. "You good, Dad?" he asked. I told him I was fine. But standing next to my truck, watching him head back inside, I noticed something I had been noticing for months and hadn't named yet. The way Cassie stood slightly behind Derek, not beside him. The way she answered questions directed at her by glancing at him first. The way her laugh came out half a second too late, like she was checking to make sure it was permitted. I noticed those things the way you notice a change in wind direction before a storm. Quietly and with concern. I was almost to the highway on-ramp when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. One message from Derek. 3 words. Lighthouse. Gray sky. My hands went tight on the wheel before my brain had fully processed what I was reading. 30 years of everything I thought I'd left behind came back in about 4 seconds flat. I pulled off the road onto the gravel shoulder so fast that a truck behind me laid on its horn. When Derek was 9 years old, I sat him down at the kitchen table during one of my brief periods home between assignments and taught him a distress phrase. His mother had thought it was morbid. I had thought it was necessary. A child with a parent in certain kinds of work learns early that there are situations where speaking plainly isn't safe. So we built a code the way you build any good security, simple enough to remember under pressure, meaningless to anyone who didn't already know. Lighthouse, gray sky. It meant, I am not safe. I cannot say this out loud. Come now. I called Derek immediately. Voicemail. I called again. Same. The third time I called, the phone rang twice, and then went silent, in a way that didn't sound like a dropped call. I sat there for exactly 4 seconds. Then I reached under the seat and pulled out a small waterproof case I had not opened in 8 years. Inside was a folded index card with 6 phone numbers written in pencil, no names beside any of them. People from my old life who understood what it meant when a number they hadn't heard from in years showed up without warning at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. I dialed the first one. It rang twice. "This is Garrett," said a voice that sounded completely awake. "It's Hayes," I said. A half-second pause. Then, alert. "Location? My son's house. Fairview Drive, Charlottesville," he used the phrase. Another pause, different from the first. Working pause. 12 minutes, Garrett said. Maybe 14. He hung up. No questions, no follow-up, no expression of doubt. That is the only way people who have done serious work together know how to communicate in situations like this. Efficiency isn't coldness. It's respect. I turned the truck around in a ditch entrance and drove back toward town with both hands on the wheel and my mind going very quiet in the specific way it used to go quiet when a situation was unfolding and there was no room for anything. That wasn't useful. I stopped being Walter Hayes, retired postal worker. I stopped being the man Margaret mocked at birthday dinners. I stopped being the grandfather who couldn't find the right aisle at Home Depot. By the time I reached Fairview Drive, the person driving the truck was someone else entirely. The 2 expeditions were already there when I arrived. Garrett had made it in 11 minutes, which didn't surprise me. He'd been running a private security consulting group out of Roanoke for the past 6 years. But before that, he'd spent 2 decades doing exactly the kind of work I'd spent 2 decades doing, just in different theaters. He was standing beside the lead vehicle when I pulled up, wearing jeans and a dark jacket, gray at the temples now, but the same absolutely steady eyes I remembered from a firebase in Kunar Province back in 2007. He handed me a brief situation summary without me asking. Movement inside. 2 people visible through front window. 1 elevated voice, male. No confirmed weapons, but elevated voice was the kind that made people nervous. "Sheriff's en route," he said. "ETA, 7 minutes. We wait for them, unless it escalates," I said. "Right." I looked toward the house. Derek's place was a small craftsman bungalow he'd bought 2 years earlier on a tree-lined block in a quiet neighborhood. Porch light on, lights blazing through the front windows. Derek's car in the driveway and another car I didn't recognize parked at the curb with 2 wheels up on the grass, which is the kind of thing that tells you something about a person's state of mind when they arrived. Through the living room window I could see shadows. One of them moving in circles, one of them very still. I heard something break. Then I heard Cassie's voice. Not words, just the pitch of it. That specific register that isn't quite a scream because the person producing it has made a decision not to scream, and that decision costs them something. I was already moving toward the porch when Garrett caught up beside me. "Hayes, you heard her," I said. A half beat. Then, "Yeah." We went up the porch steps fast. One of Garrett's men was already at the door. Not law enforcement, not breaking and entering, just a firm knock and a louder voice announcing that people were outside and were coming in, which is sometimes enough to change the calculation inside a room. It wasn't enough that night. The door opened under a firm shoulder, and we moved into the entryway. The living room looked like someone had decided to rearrange every piece of furniture by knocking it sideways. End table overturned, a ceramic lamp in 3 pieces on the hardwood floor. Derek's bookshelf half emptied, paperbacks scattered. And in the middle of it, Cassie backed against the far wall with her arms crossed tight over her chest, and a man I had met twice, her older brother, a 38-year-old named Preston, who had driven up from Lynchburg without being invited, standing between her and the hallway, blocking the exit with his body the way people do when they want to make a point about who controls the exits. Derek was off to the side near the kitchen doorway, trying to talk Preston down in the measured tones of a man who was clearly terrified and was using calmness like a shield he didn't fully trust. Preston turned when we came through the door. He was a large man, broad, the kind of build that comes from work rather than a gym, and he had the specific expression of someone who had decided a long time ago that volume and physical presence were the only currencies that mattered. He looked at Garrett's men with contempt, and then he looked at me and I saw the exact moment he made his first mistake of the evening, which was deciding I was the least threatening person in the room. "Who are you?" he said. "Who are all of you?" I looked past him at Cassie. She was watching me with her arms still crossed, but her eyes had changed when we came through the door. Something in them was less closed than it had been a second before. "Cassie," I said. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head once, barely. "No." "Derek," I said. "Come stand over here." Derek moved immediately, crossing to where I was standing, and the fact that he moved without hesitation toward me and not toward Preston told me everything I needed to know about where the power was sitting in that room before we arrived. Preston took a step forward. "She doesn't need rescuing. This is a family matter." "I understand that," I said. "Then get your people out of my sister's house." "It's Derek's house," I said. "And yes, this is a family matter, which is why I'm here." He stared at me. "Who the hell are you?" One of Garrett's men said something quietly into his radio. Preston's eyes cut toward the sound, and in that half-second of distraction I crossed the distance between us until I was close enough that he had to look at me instead of the room. "My name is Walter Hayes," I said. My voice came out at the register I used when I needed people to understand that what I was saying was the complete and final version of events. "I am Derek's father, and I am going to ask you to sit down, or the next people through that door are going to be the Albemarle County Sheriff's deputies, who are currently about 90 seconds away, and you are going to have a conversation with them instead of with me. Your call." Preston looked at me for a long time. He was trying to find something in my face that matched the version of me he had decided I was based on what he could see. Older man, quiet voice, nothing loud about me. He was looking for weakness because that was the only map he knew how to read. He didn't find what he was looking for. "Sit down," I said again. His shoulders dropped first, then his chin. Then he sat down heavily on the couch and put his hands on his knees and stared at the floor like a man who has just noticed he's been standing at the edge of something with no way back that doesn't involve help. 2 deputies came through the door 40 seconds later. Garrett had them briefed in under a minute. Preston left in a patrol car without resistance. No charges filed that night, but there was a clear and documented record now, which was its own form of protection. After the deputies left and Garrett's team cleared out with handshakes and the particular kind of nod that serves as a full sentence between certain people, Derek and Cassie sat on the couch together and neither of them spoke for a while. Cassie had stopped shaking by then, but only barely. I sat across from them in the overturned armchair I had set back on its feet. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. Cassie looked at Derek. He reached over and took her hand. "A while," he said. "Her brother?" Derek nodded. "He doesn't think I'm right for her. He's been..." He paused, choosing words. "He has opinions about how she should live." I looked at Cassie. "Has he come to the house before like this?" She looked at the floor. "Once, 2 months ago. Not this bad." "Did you tell anyone?" A long pause. I didn't want to make it a bigger thing. I understood that sentence in a way that surprised me. Because I had said a version of it myself, 30 years earlier, in a different kind of situation where I hadn't wanted to make something a bigger thing, where staying quiet felt like control and was actually just a different kind of fear dressed in patience's clothing. I didn't say that to them then. I filed it away for later. Derek walked me to my truck around midnight. The street was quiet again, October air carrying that particular smell of fallen leaves and cold that I associated with getting older, not unpleasantly, just honestly. He stood beside the driver's door with his hands in his jacket pockets, and I could see him working up to something. "Dad," he said. "Those guys. Garrett. The way they showed up." "Old friends," I said. "You called them." "Yes. And they just came. No questions. That's how it works with some people." He was quiet for a moment. "Mom always said you spent 20 years playing soldier. Your mother said a lot of things. What did you actually do?" I looked out at the street for a few seconds. The honest answer to that question was layered in ways that weren't fully mine to share. Some of it was classification that had long since expired. Some of it was memory I'd spent 15 years packing carefully into boxes I didn't open at night anymore. Some of it was just hard to put into language that translated cleanly into a quiet street in Charlottesville. "Intelligence work," I said. "Supporting special operations. Overseas, mostly. Some domestic work later on." Derek was quiet. Then, like, "Actual..." "Yes," I said. Actual. He absorbed that. Does Mom know? She knows I was career Army. She didn't ask deeper questions and I didn't offer deeper answers. Partly my fault. Partly how things were. I paused. It's complicated. Derek looked at me with the expression of someone recalculating something they thought they had already figured out. I recognized it because I had worn the same expression myself. The night my own father sat me down at 70 years old and told me things about his service in Korea that he had never told anyone. You never seemed like... Derek stopped. Like what? He gestured vaguely toward the house, toward the evening, toward Garrett's vehicles and the deputies and all of it. Like that. I know, I said. That was the idea. I drove home through dark roads thinking about the shape of secrets and what they cost over time. Not the classified kind. Those had their own weight, but a familiar one I had made peace with. I was thinking about the personal ones. The way I had let Margaret's narrative about me settle over the years like dust over furniture, not because it was true, but because correcting it would have required explaining things I wasn't ready to explain. And so the quiet man became the weak man in the retelling, and I had let it happen because the alternative seemed more complicated than it was worth. That was its own kind of mistake. 3 days later, Margaret called me. Not an unusual occurrence, we still shared a son, still operated in overlapping circles of obligation, the way divorced parents of adult children inevitably do. But this call had a different texture from the first word. Walter, she said. Derek told me what happened. Okay. Silence. Then, he told me about the men who came. Old colleagues, I said. It was nothing dramatic. He said one of them called you Colonel. I didn't answer immediately. Walter, were you actually? Yes, I said. I was actually... Another silence. Longer than the first. Margaret's silences, unlike her words, could be honest. This one felt like a woman sitting in her kitchen rearranging a mental filing system that had been organized one way for 30 years and suddenly didn't fit the drawer anymore. You never said, she said finally. You never asked what I actually did. You asked why I was gone so much. That's a different question. That's not fair. Maybe not entirely, I said. I wasn't easy to be married to. I know that. Another pause. Why didn't you just tell me? I thought about how to answer that honestly without making it an accusation, because I didn't know how to explain things I wasn't supposed to explain. And after long enough, the silence became habit. And then the habit became its own kind of wall. I paused. I should have tried harder to find a way through it. That part is mine. Margaret was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had lost the sharpness I associated with her. What was underneath it was something older and more tired. I made it worse, she said. Didn't I? With the jokes. Some of them landed harder than you probably intended. I didn't know. I know, I said. That was partly by design. And partly my fault for not fixing it. We stayed on the phone without speaking for what felt like a long time. Outside my kitchen window, a late October wind was moving through the sycamores. Their yellow leaves came down in slow spirals. There's a specific feeling at 63, watching leaves fall, that isn't quite sadness, and isn't quite peace. It's closer to understanding that you've been the author of more of your own story than you pretended to be. I wasn't easy to live with. Margaret had been right about that. Intelligence work changes your emotional architecture in ways you don't notice until you're standing in the ruins of something that might have worked differently. You learn to compartmentalize professionally, and the skill transfers in directions you didn't intend. Fear goes in a box, grief goes in a box. Eventually, without meaning to, your marriage goes in a box too, and then one day your wife starts filling in the silence with her own story about who you are. And you let her because arguing would require opening boxes you've spent years sealing shut. Neither of us had been wrong about everything. Neither of us had been right about everything. That was the truth that took me nearly 15 years after the divorce to arrive at clearly. 6 weeks after the incident at Derek's house, Cassie filed for a restraining order against her brother. Derek stood beside her at the courthouse. I drove them there and waited in the parking lot with 2 cups of coffee and a paperback I didn't read. Afterward, the 3 of us sat in a diner on the downtown mall and ate breakfast food at 2 in the afternoon the way people do when they've been through something and need ordinary life to feel normal again. Cassie ordered pancakes. Derek ordered an omelet. I ordered toast and looked out the window at the brick pedestrian street and the students walking past in their light fall coats. Cassie looked up from her plate after a while. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Hayes?" "Walter," I said. "Walter," she smiled faintly. "How did you stay so calm?" "That night. He's not a small person, and you just walked in and talked to him like—" She searched for the right word. "Like it wasn't a big deal?" I said. "Like you already knew how it ended." I thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest without being a TED talk about emotional regulation. "I didn't know how it ended," I said. "I just knew that me being calm gave everyone in that room a better chance than me not being calm. That's not bravery. That's just arithmetic." She looked at me for a moment. "Derek said you were in the military." "For a long time, yes. He said more than that, actually." She glanced at Derek. Something passed between them. One of those small marital looks people develop, the ones that contain entire sentences. "He said you were something his mother never knew about." "His mother knows now," I said. "Does that bother you?" I looked out the window again. A woman was walking a very old dog very slowly down the brick sidewalk. The dog looked pleased to be outside anyway. "No," I said. "I think I spent a long time hiding behind other people's wrong impressions of me because it was easier than correcting them. That's not a strategy. That's just loneliness that wears a practical face." Cassie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Preston used to tell me I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much." She looked down at her coffee cup. "He said it so many times I started believing it was true." I nodded slowly. "People who need to make you smaller to feel bigger will find a language for it eventually. It doesn't have anything to do with you." Derek put his hand over hers on the table. "You know what I learned?" I said, after about 40 years of watching human beings under pressure. I looked at both of them. The ones who talk the loudest about other people's weakness are almost always managing a fear they've never found the words for. That doesn't make them innocent. It explains them. And understanding something is not the same as excusing it. That landed in the silence, the way true things sometimes land without fanfare, without anyone needing to affirm it, just sitting there on the table beside the pancakes like a fact that had been waiting to be said out loud. We finished breakfast. I paid the bill. They argued about it the way young people argue about checks when an older person is present, with more energy than conviction. I left the tip in cash and didn't give them time to reconsider. It was an ordinary Thursday, cold sun, good coffee, both of my son's hands accounted for, and safe. Some days, that's exactly enough. 4 months after that October evening, I ran into Margaret at the hospital. Not because of anything dramatic. I was there for a follow-up on a knee that had been giving me trouble since a jump in 2009, that the Army's physical therapist at the time had assured me would heal completely, which it had not. She was there visiting her sister, who was recovering from hip replacement surgery. We saw each other across a waiting room full of outdated magazines and a television playing a news channel nobody was watching. She looked the same as she always looked, which was put together in a way that cost her visible effort, which I had once mistaken for coldness and now recognized for what it was, someone managing anxiety the only way they'd been taught. We sat down together in the corner of the waiting room without discussing whether we were going to. "How's the knee?" she asked. "Complaining," I said. "You should have gotten that looked at years ago." "Probably." She folded her hands in her lap. Outside the window, bare January trees lined the hospital entrance road, the sky behind them, the color of old pewter. Virginia in winter has a specific gravity to it. "I've been thinking," Margaret said, "about what you said, about the silence becoming a wall." I waited. "I did that too," she said. "Not the same way. But I filled the silence with other things. Complaints, jokes, making you small because—" She stopped. "Because?" I said, not unkindly. She looked at her hands. "Because you were gone so much, and when you were there, you weren't fully there. And I didn't know how to say that plainly. So I said everything else instead." I looked at the television for a moment. "We were probably talking past each other for about 20 of the 28 years, I said. "At least 20. That's a lot of years to be in the same house and miss each other. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something sadder. Yes, it is. I turned to look at her directly. Margaret, I want to say something I should have said a long time ago. She met my eyes, wary, but listening. I wasn't easy, I said. I know you've heard me say that the way people say things when they don't entirely mean them, but I mean it honestly. I was emotionally absent for most of our marriage, not because I didn't care, because I had been trained to put everything in a box, and I never unlearned it fast enough to be present in the ways you needed. That's mine. All of it. Margaret held my gaze for a long moment. Her eyes went slightly bright in the way that in 28 years of marriage I had seen exactly 3 times. I mocked things I didn't understand, she said quietly. And I taught Derek to see you through my version of you, not yours. She paused. That wasn't fair. No, I said. It wasn't. I'm sorry, Walter. The hospital hum continued around us. Somewhere down the corridor, a cart rattled. The television weather forecast showed a cold front moving in from the northwest. I looked at this woman I had spent most of my adult life adjacent to without fully knowing, and I thought about all the time that gets spent in the wrong kind of silence, the kind that isn't peace but only looks like it from the outside. I reached over and briefly put my hand over hers. I know, I said, and I meant it completely. That was in January. By spring, the world had gone on the way it always does, with or without people's permission. Derek and Cassie got engaged in March, on a trail above humpback rocks on a cold, clear morning when the ridge views went all the way to the next county. He called me right after, from the overlook. I could hear the wind moving through the call and his voice above it, higher than usual with something that sounded exactly like happiness. Cassie got a new job at a nonprofit in the city, working with women navigating difficult domestic situations. She told me about it one Sunday afternoon at Derek's house over coffee on the back porch, while a late spring rain ran off the roof in steady curtains. She said a lot of the women she worked with didn't have language for what had been done to them. They only knew how they felt afterward, which was smaller than before. You have to name the thing before you can leave it behind, she said. Yes, I said. That's true. She looked at me carefully. Did you ever get to do that? Name your things? I thought about that honestly. Some of them, the ones I could reach. I watched the rain. There are still a few boxes I haven't opened, but I've stopped being afraid of them. She nodded slowly. Then she looked out at the rain too, comfortable with the quiet the way people get when they've been through something real together and come out the other side with their footing intact. There's a specific peace that comes later in life, after you have stopped expecting yourself to be invincible and started being honest instead. After the marriage has ended, and the career has ended, and the version of yourself you presented to the world for 30 years has started to loosen at the edges and let some real light in, it isn't resignation. It's something more valuable than that. It's the particular freedom of no longer needing anyone's wrong impression of you to stay wrong. I still work at the hardware store on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I still make bad coffee at 6 in the morning and watch the birds at the feeder by the back window. My knee still complains on cold days. I still call Derek on Sunday evenings, and most Sundays now, Cassie answers too. And we talk about ordinary things, weather, plans, what they are cooking for dinner with the easy rhythm of people who know where they stand with each other. Margaret and I have what I can only describe as a civilized peace. Not warmth exactly, but something honest. We talk about Derek's wedding plans, we talk about her sister's recovery. Occasionally she says something sharp and I say something direct back, and then we both recognize the habit and let it go. Old patterns don't dissolve completely, they just stop running the show. One evening in early summer, Derek and I sat on his back porch after dinner while Cassie was on the phone inside with her mother. The light was going gold through the oak trees in his backyard, that long late-day light that makes everything look like it belongs on a postcard and feel like a thing you want to hold on to. Fireflies were starting up in the far end of the yard. "Dad," Derek said. He was looking out at the yard, not at me. "I've been thinking about that night." "Which part?" "The phone call. The code." I waited. "I haven't used it since I was little," he said. "I almost forgot I had it." He paused. "But when things got bad in there, it came back." like automatically. That's what it was designed for, I said. He turned to look at me. When I was 8, and you taught me that, I thought it was a game. I didn't realize you were being serious. I was always serious about it. He nodded, looked back out at the fireflies. I'm glad you were. We sat there for a while in the gold light, father and son, with the fireflies doing their small patient work in the grass, and neither of us said anything else because there wasn't anything that needed to be said. The evening held everything that needed holding, and that was more than enough. Most people are carrying things you can't see. The quiet man at the barber shop who doesn't talk about where he's been. The older woman at the grocery store who moved through 4 decades of difficulty without anyone asking if she was all right. The father who seemed distant and turned out to be somewhere else, entirely in ways that weren't his to explain. We read each other by surface and missed the whole book underneath. If there is someone in your life you have been reading by surface, only a parent, a veteran, a spouse, a friend who got quiet somewhere along the way and never got loud again, I hope you'll ask them a real question before the season changes. Not a polite question, a real one. Sometimes the conversation you've been postponing is the one that costs the least and returns the most. Thank you for being here with me tonight. The people we dismiss most easily are often the ones carrying the most quietly, without complaint, without asking to be seen. Walter never needed Margaret's approval to know his own worth, but he also never stopped trying to find a way back to honesty. That balance, staying humble enough to apologize, strong enough not to disappear, is something worth practicing every single day. And if there's someone in your life you've been reading wrong, today is still early enough to ask a better question. A small note worth sharing. This story was created and imagined by AI, offered to you as entertainment, and hopefully, as a quiet reminder that kindness and honesty still matter in every season of life.